United States Embassy in South Africa has requested accreditation for several diplomats for the G20 summit closing event on Sunday. Delegates will be led by U.S. Head of Mission Mark Dillard. In the letter, the embassy requests for a police motorcade and security. According to the U.S. government, the delegation will be attending the handover ceremony as a formality but will not be joining any of the discussions. The U.S. will be taking over the G20 presidency from South Africa. Earlier, President Cyril Ramaphosa confirmed that talks are underway with the United States regarding its participation in the G20 summit.
We have received notice from the United States, a notice which we are still in discussions with them over, about a change of mind about participating in one shape, form or other in the summit. So the discussions are still ongoing. This comes really at the late hour before the summit begins. And so therefore we do need to engage in those types of discussions to see how practical it is and what it finally really means. In a way, we see this as a positive sign, very positive, because, as I've often said, boycott politics never work.
Ramaphosa says efforts are underway to deal with logistical issues.
The United States is a member of the G20. They are the original member of the G20, so they have the right to be here. And all we will be seeking to do is to look at the various practicalities, logistical and otherwise, for them to participate. They have a seat at the round table, as you will see on Saturday. There is a seat for the United States. When President Trump said they are not coming, that seat still remained. It was empty for a while, but it will hopefully be occupied, but we want to deal with all those practicalities.
Now, Ramaphosa earlier source, the U.S. can't use its power to bully other countries. He was delivering closing remarks at the G20 Social Summit on Gauteng's East Rand.
It cannot be that a country's geographical location or income level or army determines who has a voice and who is spoken down to. And it basically means that there should be no bullying of one nation by another nation. We are all equal. In choosing the theme, when we chose the theme that we must advance a vision of meaningful, credible global cooperation, we did not only mean a small club of leaders. We meant the people of the world must be able to be part of that vision. It is our expectation that this social summit will be remembered for being far more than a marketplace of ideas.
American economist Professor Jeffrey Sachs has slammed Trump's snubbing of the G20 summit. He was speaking at Unisa's 2025 Founders Lecture in Pretoria today.
Why isn't Donald Trump coming tomorrow? Because he has a 4-year-old mentality, and he's having a tantrum. He's having a tantrum. What is the tantrum? That the rest of the world says, we don't want a king. As President Lula said, we don't need an emperor. he would come here as just one of 20 leaders or 21. He doesn't want that. He's having a tantrum.
Sachs says Trump's actions show the end of the U.S. imperial age.
So China made it, and that's why we're at the end of yet another cycle. The European imperial age is over. The British imperial age ended in 1945, and the U.S. imperial age is ending right now. And that's why Donald Trump is home. Because he doesn't want to be one of several. That's all.
However, Professor Sachs has warned that the United States remains a dangerous country.
The delusion is still in Washington, by the way. It's not over. It's still a powerful country. It's still a dangerous country. It's got too big a military. It still has its hands on the valves of the international payment system to a large extent. It can turn on and off the spigot for countries that are vulnerable. Remember, the IMF and the World Bank are U.S. institutions, even though they are multilateral institutions. They were founded for not bad purposes, by the way, but they are American-dominated institutions.
All right, now let's have this conversation with international relations expert Dr. Oscar van Heerden, as well as Senior Research Fellow at the Africa-Asia Dialogues, Thembisa Fakude, joining us for this conversation on G20. Remember, you can send us your comments and questions on WhatsApp to 072-110-5584, or you can give us a call on 010-594-6010. Very good evening to you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us today. Mr. Thembisa Fakude, maybe perhaps let's just begin with you with regards to just how you interpret this turn by the U.S. with regards to that participation, although it is just at the closing ceremony. What implications does this have for South Africa, if any, at this point in time with regards to the diplomatic sovereignty that the U.S. now will be attending the G20 summit, but the closing ceremony?
Well, first of all, it was very childish for the United States to have taken the position that they've taken. I've said many times before that Trump was going to flip-flop and he was going to change his position and at the 11th hour decide to attend. And this is what we're seeing happening at the moment. The winners, of course, in all of this is brand South Africa. Everyone is talking about South Africa at the moment because of all the positions that we've taken. And this snub, which was to a large extent very racist in its form, has come back to hit back at Donald Trump. And here we are still standing as a country, and I think it's going to be a successful G20. And by the way, the United States has always given a misinformation in terms of its participation, because we know that they are part of the troika that consists of the past, present, and future chairpersonship secretariat in terms of carrying on the work of the G20. They've been working with Brazil and South Africa all along, and when Trump made that announcement, they were still working. So it would have been extremely embarrassing for Trump or United States not to formally accept the mandate that was going to be passed on by the chairpersonship of President Cyril Ramaphosa on Saturday. So it's good news for South Africa. And again, as I've said, brand South Africa is the winner at the moment, because everyone is not only respecting this country for its position it's taken, but it's a talking subject throughout the world at the moment.
It certainly is. I mean, Dr. van Heerden, we heard earlier from Professor Sachs speaking at the Unisa 2025 Founders Lecture, and he said that Trump has the mentality of a 4-year-old. What ways do the U.S.'s threats undermine the G20 in terms of their outcomes, and what does this reflect with regards to just the broader geopolitical strategies that and how should South Africa respond to this diplomatically?
Yeah, thank you. You know, what we are seeing yet again is the schizophrenic behavior of Donald Trump and his administration. This is a clear-cut situation where the president shoots from the hip He doesn't realize what he's saying. None of the minions around him wants to question him and say that it is a mistake. And then when they realize that he bluffed and Ramaphosa called his bluff and said it's their loss, that's when they realize that every other country in the G20 is going to be there. You know, we've had our own journalist who wants to be sensational and say other countries are also not going to be there, which was simply not true. Russia, China, Mexico, all of those countries, the heads of states couldn't make it, but they certainly were supportive of the presidency of South Africa, and they are sending high-ranking officials from their government to be at the summit. And I think when Trump and his people saw this, that people are not heeding his boycott, that's when they now rallied and said, we are going to look like the idiots. We are going to have egg on our face. Let's at least try to salvage the situation. And I'm not surprised that there is now talks of them wanting to be part of some form, shape of this G20, which I agree with Thembisa, is going to be a very successful one, the first to be on the African continent.
Thembisa, you spoke about brand South Africa being the winner at this point, and just considering the US's stance and their actions up until now, what do you think of the potential long-term impacts on South Africa's positioning when they said, well, do as you please, this summit will continue and it will be a success and there'll be a declaration at the end of it? What does it do to our positioning with regards to global multilateral institutions?
Well, South Africa has always been a proponent of multilateralism, and we see President Cyril Ramaphosa following on the footsteps of President Mandela and Thabo Mbeki in terms of ensuring that this platform that all of us, particularly those of us who are from developing nations, have as the only platform that can give us the voice and reserve a table, a seat on the table of international dialogue continues and is preserved. So I think what we're going to see happening henceforth is a Cyril Ramaphosa that is going to be emboldened, further respected by the world. And by the way, G20 is not just the meeting of the G20 heads of state, but also a lot of parallel gatherings that are taking place, which are currently used to further relations and strengthen relationships between South Africa and the world. B20, for example, a lot of business discussions have been taking place. We had T20 and C20 and other 20s that have been taking place. All of that, as far as I'm concerned, strengthen our position as a country, but at the same time, notwithstanding my continual criticism of South African foreign policy of biting more than it can chew, we are suddenly seeing South Africa standing up and claiming its position and leading in terms of its position within the multilateral systems in this world. And the subjects that are, for example, raising at the UN level, whether it's about the reformation of the United Nations Security Council and all other important global discussions, put us in a very strong position as a country from a global south that is willing to stand its position and continue furthering and promoting multilateralism.
Doc, does this signal the end of US imperial age?
It has been in the making for some time. This is, unfortunately, you know, the last kicks. This is why we are seeing this bullying behavior. The Trump administration needs to take responsibility for what is happening in the international system. BRICS is not talking about de-dollarization because they are anti-America. They are talking about de-dollarization because America decided to weaponize the US dollar, sanctioning people, bullying them. And now we see Trump's administration is weaponizing trade with tariffs and undermining countries, slapping them with 30 to 100% tariffs. They are weaponizing the dollar. They have decided to weaponize trade, and the world is responding, and they don't like it. So yes, the hegemony of the United States is waning, and unfortunately, you would have thought that they could provide leadership by doing strategic thinking, as was the case in the previous administrations of that country. But with this administration, there's no strategic thinking, and they think that it's all about the stick. The mighty will prevail, and unfortunately, the world has moved on.
Thembisa, your take on the US's imperial age coming to an end? I mean, Professor Sachs said that the US still remains a very dangerous country.
Yes, indeed. But I do agree that the US's hegemony is gone. United States or American exceptionalism out the window. We've got a president that's flip-flopping, who cannot be trusted. We have to take whatever he says with a pinch of salt. So the situation and the position of the United States has actually diminished, and it's going to be very difficult for them to regain their trust, and it's going to be very difficult for the world to believe what the United States says henceforth, because they've said so many things and flip-flopped and made U-turns so many times that it's very difficult for the world to trust the United States. Trump is causing up to all dictators of the world. We saw how he tried to defend Mohammed bin Salman a couple of hours ago during the visit of the Saudi Crown Prince to the United States, when he was asked about the atrocities of September the 11th, including the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. Trump jumped in and tried and defend something that we don't see normally at the press conferences. We don't see a president of a country defending a dictator from another country for killing another journalist, but that's what we see. So American exceptionalism is out the window, and the United States and brand America has been damaged, and it's going to take a very long time to regain the past glory.
Doc, I mean, do we still need to balance those historical ties as a country being South Africa with Western powers? And how do we do that in a strategic way that still sees us having partnerships with BRICS-aligned countries?
It's absolutely critical. You know, we mustn't think that we have exceptionalism. We need to have good relations politically and in terms of trade economically with countries like the United States. It remains the largest economy in the world, and with China and other markets. But South Africa is saying that as a responsible sovereign country, a member of the international community, let's do it with respect. Let's do it on equal terms. Let's not be insulting. Let's not bully, and let's not threaten. Because if that is the way you want to do business, then we are going to seek assistance elsewhere. We're going to have bilaterals elsewhere, because it's simply not how you conduct foreign relations. And I think that Trump and the people around him are going to have to think very hard and deep about the foreign policy that they've opted for. Because at the moment, they are definitely going to lose the primaries. They're going to lose the majority in Congress, possibly a threat to the Senate. But we'll have to see how things turn out.
Thembisa, I mean, the US has made certain accusations and led a rhetoric regarding South Africa's policies. In this instance, where we do have the globe watching, what do you think South Africa needs to do in order to craft a narrative that will maintain credibility and still have an influence on the international stage?
Well, I think the posture that South Africa took of ignoring these wild, ridiculous claim by Donald Trump of genocide and forcible removal of the Afrikaners from their land was a good position. And there are noises, of course, now and then, but nobody takes this serious. It's a joke. It's ridiculed everywhere in the world, wherever you go, because you know, people have got presence in this country, countries have got representation in this country, and they know precisely what's going on in this country. So I think these noises further dent the image of the United States, the presidency of the United States, and the integrity of the country that has been for a very long time being respected. But I think I also agree that we shouldn't stop our charm offensive in terms of bringing back the United States into the fold and continue promoting the bilaterals that we've had in the past and trade between ourselves, because at the end of the day, the national interest, I think, of this country is to ensure that there's employment and people continue their lives being improved, etc. So the United States is a significant player in that regard. But at the same time, I think the Trump's position and tariffs imposition into the world and South Africa in particular has made us to look at other alternatives and improve other relations without necessarily forsaking our relationship with the United States. And we've seen President Ramaphosa and Minister Tau up and down, globetrotting, trying to improve the relations and expanding the market through which you can trade.
Well, gentlemen, let's hold the conversation there for now. We're going to take a very quick break, but we will be back with our experts. We are speaking on the lines of the G20 Leaders Summit that's taking place this weekend, and that about turn by the US to send some delegation to attend that closing ceremony. Do stay with us. All right, welcome back. As South Africa continues to get ready for the G20 summit that's taking place this weekend, we are bringing you visuals from the Waterkloof Air Base, where many of those leaders have been arriving in South Africa. We'll continue to bring you an update and tracking as those arrivals continue at the Air Base Waterkloof. All right, let's continue with our discussions. We have our international relations expert, Dr. Oscar van Heerden, and senior research fellow at the Africa-Asia Dialogues, Thembisa Fakude, joining us for this conversation. Now, before the break, we were still talking about that rhetoric that the USA has been putting with regards to South Africa's policies. Doc, I think at the heart of this is AfriForum and the role that they have played in making sure that this rhetoric is repeated in the US and globally. How do you think South Africa as a government going forward post G20, and also just looking at the damage that some of this rhetoric has caused the country, needs to react in order to have some kind of a consequence, if any, towards AfriForum?
You know, it's a twofold process. On the one hand, I think that AfriForum and Solidariteit and others, right-wing elements, needs to acknowledge the maturity of the democracy that they live in today, where they have the freedom to express themselves, the freedom to associate, and to put up all kinds of advertisements and so forth, banners and the likes, to try and get their message across. And I think an appreciation for that is really, really important. It shows the maturity of the democracy 30 years on. On the other hand, you know, you might have these expressions of freedom and association and so forth. It's quite another thing to go to a foreign government and implore that government to directly get involved in the domestic and foreign affairs of South Africa's government, to want to tell South Africa and dictate to South Africa what they should and should not do in terms of domestic laws, whether that is around the Bella Act, whether it's about the NHI, whether it's about expropriation of land without compensation, etc. These concerns from AfriSol, as they are now called, does not take into cognizance the history of this country. Trump certainly doesn't appreciate the history of this country. But as Thembisa has indicated, others know the history. They've interacted with South Africa. They know where South Africa comes from. They know that there's a need for redress and legislation that starts addressing the ills of the past. So I think that you don't go to those countries and tell lies and instigate to a point where you want the United States government to get involved in the affairs of our own country. I do think that we need to begin to have regulations and legislation that says if you do that, then you can't do it based on falsehoods, because that does negatively impact on the country in terms of trade, in terms of politically and economically. And for that, you must be held accountable. And I think Kali, Ernst, and others need to take stock. It's one thing to want to get your message across as a minority. It's quite another thing to spread lies, untruths, and falsehoods about genocides, targeted murders, and so forth. That the South African people will not stand for.
Thembisa, your take on South African government and their actions towards Solidarity and AfriForum?
Well, I think as our government particularly was a bit soft towards the Solidarity and AfriForum. I think you should have read the Merit Act. This, to me, put us very closely on deliberate sabotage of not only sovereignty, but also encouraging political instability within the country. The lies that they continue to peddle, and the partnership with other right-wing formations in the United States, including Elon Musk, in peddling those lies, deserve a serious and a hard kind of, redress and reading of a right act to these formations that are actually risking instability and political instability in this country. So this shouldn't be taken lightly. And I'll continue criticizing the president in this regard, that he was a bit too soft, continues to smile in their faces while they are continuing with this act of sabotage, which deserve something a bit harsher. The fact that on the eve of the G20, they decide, again, hubris and empowered kind of arrogance, they decide to put up a banner in one of the main highways leading to the venue at which this is going to be taking place, in accommodation or places of accommodation of all the heads of states and important people that will be visiting this country. That shows you that these people are, there's no remorse in what they did. They still believe that is the right thing that they did. And I think it's about time, maybe we should wait until the G20. It's about time that harsh words, stern words from the president are directed towards these people to, instruct them to stop doing what they're doing, because it does really pose a threat of a serious political instability in this country, not only destroying the unity that we've tried very hard to achieve over the years, but they are really threatening political instability as far as I'm concerned.
So Thembisa, what do you think that slap on the wrist, what perception does it create even for other people that want to voice out some of their own frustrations?
Well, again, as Oscar is saying, it's okay for us to, and this country allows us to express ourselves. We have got freedoms that many other people throughout the world do not have, including some in the United States with the advent of Donald Trump. But at the same time, it can't be free for all. You can't have people coming peddling lies and they will come back, think about other tactics on how to go about encouraging instability and political instability and potential economic instability in this country, and it might just be left like that. I think the president needs to take a firmer position. If not the president, at least the governing party needs to take a firmer position in terms of countering these narratives. And there must be, I think, an independent lobby group that will also continually observe and counter these narratives, because these narratives in the long run could be detrimental.
Most certainly. Doc, I mean, Thembisa spoke a little earlier on about the opportunity that has been created out of this adversity with regards to when the US put in the tariffs. We were able then to open our eyes wider and look at other avenues with regards to bilateral trade. What do you think of these strategic opportunities for South Africa to turn such diplomatic challenges into avenues of deeper engagement with both the US and other global powers?
No, I think that the government was quick to realize that, we have our traditional trading partners, but if they don't want to play ball, then you have to look further afield. And to the credit of the Ramaphosa administration, to Parks Tau and others, they decided to go to Malaysia, go to Indonesia, to sign free trade agreements with those countries, Vietnam and so forth, and also to go to Switzerland, in the heart of the European Union, to also strike a deal there. They got some money in terms of the just transition from the European Union, which will go a long way in addressing some of the communities in and around Mpumalanga. They also got money from the Chinese that is now going to start our own Silicon Valley in terms of technological advancement, 10 billion for that. So they're ticking all the right boxes. I don't think Ramaphosa is taking a cheap shot in his latest presidential letter, when he says that indeed it seems the economy has turned a corner. Of course, we all know the triple challenges remain. Unemployment, inequality, and poverty is still high. But I do think, coming out of the COVID period, where things were not looking good, we have turned a corner. Ports, rails are improving. South Africa is on a good trajectory. And I think that it's that sort of positiveness that Ramaphosa was exerting with regards to hosting the G20. I do think that, like the World Cup in 2010, like the successful anti-racism conference in Durban and eThekwini, and like the BRICS summit that was held here, this G20 has certainly put us back on the map, has put Africa on the map. And I think that this is a good thing, that we are casting our eyes further afield beyond our traditional partners with regards to trade.
So, Thembisa, what do you think are the lessons that can be drawn from this diplomatic episode, and especially in terms of Africa's agency and resilience in the international diplomacy?
Well, I think South Africa, as I've said, I've criticized our foreign policy as biting more than you can chew, but I hate to eat humble pie sometimes when I see what's going on in terms of what South African diplomats and the president are doing overseas, especially in terms of attracting all of these big important events into this country. And by the way, South Africa is not monopolizing this attention. It always wants to share the attention with the rest of Africa, because as many people have said, if South Africa fails, this will be a reflection on all countries in Africa. So we have to make sure that we succeed in whatever it is that we're doing. So our foreign policy is maturing, although in many instances I thought we are bringing a butter knife to a gunfight, but we see emboldened, strong and tough President Cyril Ramaphosa often dealing with these issues head on. And the fact that we are continually selected to host these very important events, and people are now talking about South Africa as an equal partner with other big global countries, that tells you that there's something happening and there's a payoff of some sort in terms of our very aggressive and sometimes, punching way above our weight foreign policy.
Well, we have visuals currently on the screen of Air China, and that delegation is about to disembark at the OR Tambo International Airport. You mentioned there, Doc, that some world leaders are not physically going to be here themselves, but they are sending delegations. We are expecting the PM from China, Li Shang, to arrive. Maybe let's just talk about those relations between South Africa and China and how this relationship has seemingly grown over the years.
No, exponentially. It was China who insisted back then that South Africa should be part of BRICS before the S was added. It was China that realized that, of course, they could have chosen any other partner on the continent. It could have been Nigeria, Nigeria, it could have been Egypt or Algeria. But the Chinese was very adamant that it should be South Africa. And I think it's because strategically they realized that it's a diverse economy. It's a very sophisticated financial system. They have all the right things in place in terms of infrastructure, telecommunications, and the likes. They've done their homework. And since then, the relationship has just grown exponentially. You know, what I find bizarre from Donald Trump and his administration, not that we want to talk about him the whole evening, is that China is the #1 trading partner of the United States. It's the #1 trading partner of the European Union. I don't understand why they think it can't be the #1 trading partner for South Africa. It's a no-brainer. You know, some people in our own opposition parties say that it's because we have this affinity and this historical relationship. We're acting out of our hearts and not our minds. And I remind them, no, it has nothing to do with the heart. We are doing what all other countries are doing. China is a huge market. Our industry, our agriculture sector, our automobile and other technical sectors want access to that market like any other country in the world, and it would be silly for us not to actually take advantage of that with such a huge market. And of course, it's reciprocal. Lots of money has come into South Africa from China. We know that they are a huge stakeholder in Standard Bank. We know that they've given money for all kinds of infrastructure development and so forth. It is a relationship that is built on mutual respect. We treat each other as adults in the room, and not misbehave like little kids. And I think this has been a strength, from strength to strength. It is unfortunate that Xi Jinping himself couldn't be here, but I'm almost certain that he would have wanted to be part of this G20. But circumstances didn't allow him.
Well, some have speculated with regards to those circumstances, saying he's taking care of some domestic issues, but also others have highlighted that since COVID hit and him being in his 70s, he really doesn't travel much. So this really is not necessarily about whether or not he is coming to South Africa. Thembisa, Doc spoke there about the reciprocal relationship between South Africa and China. What do you see is the significance of South Africa to China?
Well, first of all, I think it was wrong for some of us as talking heads and commentators, including the media, to include Xi Jinping in the bracket of those who are boycotting South Africa's G20. And I'm glad that you qualified why he couldn't come, because this is the leader that's been very supportive of this country. And we continue seeing an open business relationship and economic trading relationship improving between China and South Africa. And I think that's going to happen. And it's going to be encouraged by and large by the respect that China affords countries that it deals with. As Oscar says, everyone is equal on that negotiating table. And for me, the most important thing is often when South Africa or any other African countries, and I've been following this very closely, complain about China, whether it's about the exportation or exporting labor from China into Africa, and many African countries have complained. China has quickly addressed those kind of concerns. In South Africa, we've had a number of concerns often when we used to meet with the ambassador, and those things are quickly addressed. So this is a country that's willing to have a positive relationship with Africa. It's a country that's willing to contribute towards the development of Africa, because I think they do understand that economic development and success of African countries is going to lead to a peaceful world. And you can't have a peaceful world if you don't promote equality and encourage a positive and constructive economic engagement between yourself and Africa. And this is what I think they are doing at the moment. They're improving through their Belt Road Initiative relations with everyone, because, as you know, Belt Road initiatives will likely depend on good neighborliness, because there's going to be roads and railway lines linking the world to China, which I've had the pleasure of visiting. And if you don't have a good neighborliness and neighbor relationships between these countries through which the road and the railway belt is going to be going through, that's not going to be successful. So because of that, I think they understand what they need to do, and they're doing that at the moment, particularly with South Africa.
Doc, I mean, speaking of good neighborliness, South Africa is quite often considered as the big brother of Africa. Do you think that we serve as a very good gateway for other countries on the African continent to enjoy some of the benefits from economies such as China?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I do think that there's a recognition by many in the continent. Of course, we also have our healthy competitors, such in the form of Egypt, Nigeria, and so on. But healthy is the operative word. It is not antagonistic. They sit around the table. They understand that indeed they all need to benefit. The AU is also here at the G20, and the president of the AU was having some words to also give to the United States in saying that our time has come. It's time to begin to take Africa serious. We have the talking points that we've been hearing these last few days. 30% of the critical minerals that we have on the continent, 60% of arable land for agricultural purposes, a young population, more than any other continent. So labor is not an issue. Skills is not an issue. It is definitely Africa in terms of the requisite leadership. If we have the requisite leadership, then Africa is definitely going to be excelling going into the future. And I think Europe is realizing that they are no longer in control. The United States is waning, Asia is rising, and everyone wants to be partners with Africa. And I think this is what this G20 is beginning to initiate. And Ramaphosa saying that allow us to be the conduit, allow us to be the gateway into the continent.
And Doc, I mean, what would that really translate into for the ordinary Joe on the street, for all of these world leaders culminating and coming into South Africa, having these conversations about issues that affect each and every one of us? What really, or how does it really translate in them understanding how it affects their everyday life?
You know, I just recently came a few days ago from the Social Summit, which is also part of the G20. And here you have the NGOs, the CBOs, really people on the ground, also wanting to have a say, also wanting to influence policy. And the thing that I took away from that is that the ordinary people on the ground realize that even though South Africa has put these 4 thematic areas on the agenda of this G20, it does actually affect them on in the streets. So let's go through them. 1, it's talking about the debt of third world countries and African countries. And it is saying that there needs to be better terms. It needs to be cheaper to be able to service those debts. And as you know, if we get that right, and there's agreement around that, it then means that there's more money into the coffers of those African countries. And those are monies that will be spent on ordinary citizens in healthcare, in education, in social programs, and so forth. Secondly, is the climate just transition. It's saying that you've made commitments as the European and the leading economies. Honor those commitments, give us the money to make the transition, because to move from coal, which we have in abundance in South Africa, to renewables is going to affect some communities, and therefore we need money to make sure that we can transform those communities so that they can begin to have the skills and service the new industry. Similarly with Nigeria and other countries that is dependent on oil and fossil fuels, etc. Honor those commitments. Let's move together on the climate realities. Thirdly is about our critical minerals. Don't just take and extract like you've done over the last centuries. Let's begin to have a conversation about making sure that there's beneficiation, that can translate into job creation. Again, the ordinary person that is unemployed needs the employment and so forth. So these issues are all affecting ordinary Africans on the streets, and we would be well to encourage the presidency of the G20 South Africa to push very hard for the rest of the world to agree on the terms of these issues, because that will simply improve the lives of ordinary Africans.
Thembisa, in your view, how do you think South Africa should consolidate its leadership role within Africa?
Well, I think we should continue doing what we're doing in terms of our active participation, particularly within the the continental bodies such as the AU and the regional body, which is SADC. Because I think what we need at the moment, we are at the, a good friend of mine called it your oil moment. When the Gulf countries discovered oil in the 30s, they managed to beneficiate their resource. Now we've got a new resource outside the old resources that were used against us and were stolen from us at a very cheap price in some instances where they had to pay. We have these rare earth minerals which are key for AI and electric vehicles, etc. And this is the time that we need to come up with policies that are going to be fit for purpose. We need to come up with positions that are going to help advance the economies of Africa. We can't afford to be exploited for the second time. So beneficiation is the key word this time around, that all of these institutions and countries that seek to want to deal and do business with us in terms of buying our rare earths, they must also invest in factories that will convert those minerals into final goods, and we can therefore benefit as the originators of these rare earths. Because at the moment, what we see happening, particularly in countries such as the DRC, it's business as usual. Zambia is continually exploiting the copper without actually turning that into a final product. And the exploitation continues. And I think it's up to us, and Cyril Ramaphosa is to an extent taking that responsibility.
Right.
That he was going to go around and ensure that he encourages African countries to beneficiate.
Yeah. So as we're watching the visuals from the OR Tambo International Airport, in fact, the second in charge in China has just disembarked from the Air China aircraft, and that is the Prime Minister, Mr. Li, the Premier rather, Li Qiang, and he is representing that Chinese delegation at the G20 summit. He is a politician, of course, in the Chinese Communist Party. He's the second ranking member of the Politburo Standing Committee. He joined the Communist Chinese Party in 1983, and he first worked in the Communist Youth League many years ago. He is of 66 in terms of his age, and as we mentioned already, the leader of China, the President Xi Jinping, will not be attending himself. Many saying that it's because he is attending to some domestic issues, and others saying that it's since the COVID-19 pandemic. He hasn't traveled much given his age, being in his 70s. He's limited his traveling, as we see there, Li Qiang being the one that is leading that Chinese delegation at the G20 summit, where the leaders will converge this weekend. What we also, Thembisa, maybe if you could come in there with regards to what we know about the second in charge in China, Li Qiang, any workings that South Africa has had with him in the past?
Oh, yes. He's been around within the Communist Party for a very long time. As you correctly put, the second in charge, extremely powerful man, top number 2 out of 1.4 billion human beings in that country. So you can imagine how influential and powerful this man is. Has got a very good relationship, not only with President Cyril Ramaphosa, but also our previous president, particularly Jacob Zuma, and before him, Thabo Mbeki. He is amongst those that pushed for South Africa to be included within BRICS. Those are the people who were basically the full soldiers of South Africa in terms of convincing others who were reluctant of taking South Africa into this amidst competition from other African countries to be also included. He continues to lead the development of China into what it's become at the moment. And he's very involved within the foreign affairs or international relations in China, continually moving towards improving relations with other countries, including the neighboring countries of China. So he is the right person to be attending this, actually, because he's the executive arm of the Communist Party in China. And I think out of this visit, he's likely to enter into some meaningful arrangements with South Africa.
Doc, when they describe Li Shang, they say under Xi Jinping, they don't make premiers like they used to. He's certainly known as a loyalist to Xi. What can you tell us about the second in charge in China?
You know, the one thing that you must realize about the system in China is that there are 7 that forms the Politburo. Li Xiang is one of those. Very powerful in the Communist Party of China, very respected. And I agree with Thembisa that this is not his first rodeo with South Africa, as the saying goes. He is very familiar with the government, the stable government in South Africa. He advocates for the South African government all the time. And I agree with Thembisa. In fact, ironically, he is indeed the right person to be here at this first G20 in Africa, being hosted by South Africa as a member of BRICS. So I think he's probably very delighted that Xi has asked him to step in for him.
Thembisa, I mean, we heard from the Chinese government that Shang is not planning to meet with the Japanese Prime Minister on the sidelines of this weekend's G20 summit. Does this signal the worsening ties between the two countries?
I don't think so. It's 48 hours and there's a lot to be done. South Africa alone will probably want to have more meetings with him, and there are other countries that are here. So again, this is just sending us on a wild goose chase and taking the attention away from issues that matter. He's going to be very busy. I think as he lands, he's probably going to sleep tomorrow morning. Very serious concern at the moment, and I don't think it indicates anything of significance in terms of the geopolitical realities in Asia.
Well, that's certainly good to know. We do have some reactions from our viewers. A few WhatsApps have come through this evening. Let's get to some of them. Godfrey Mabasa from Soweto says Donald Trump and the United States are exposed as being bullies of the world, and this is not good for the image of the USA. South Africa handled this in a professional way. Baseka says there's a shift of power. Every empire collapses one way or another. It's bound to happen. BRICS currency will take over, and Trump is trying to hold on by attacking South Africa as the weakest link of BRICS, but he miscalculated because we are living in a time of information. The next one is from Anonymous, and Anonymous says the US has just embarrassed itself on the world stage with its last-minute change of mind. The superpower is no longer holding the balance of power. That balance of power has shifted. A new world order is gaining traction. Good evening, Katlego. While I've always known that the US will send representatives at the end for the purpose of handing over the G20 summit, but what the US president is doing is to play with people's minds. However, the world is now looking at South Africa, and this will benefit our beloved country in terms of economic growth, job creation, especially for the youth. That is Mwako from Botlokwa Mukomang. And then Mahlasi says, thank you for Trump's foolishness. Continue to dig that hole deeper. In it, we shall bury to never hear the sound of your voice. We appreciate President Cyril Ramaphosa's leadership during these trying times on a global stage, despite our local challenges. Let the rain of wisdom continue to pour on our leadership. All right, so those were our WhatsApps. Certainly one voice by many South Africans saying that there's a lot of egg left on the US's face. And like you said earlier on, Thembisa, that it's a great moment for South Africa.
Yes, indeed. It's a great moment for South Africa. I mean, those visuals, looking at those visuals, it's quite a historic moment to have so many aeroplanes carrying heads of state landing on our shores successfully, and one looking forward, of course, to a successful G20. It's a very moving historical moment for all of us in South Africa, and I think what you see happening at the moment is all South Africans joining forces and wanting to see this succeeding. It's more like a 2010 moment where South Africans are all united towards this G20 and all of them hoping and praying, of course, and wishing President Cyril Ramaphosa and his team good luck in terms of ensuring that this succeeds.
Doc, with these sort of reactions, do you think it would prompt the US to worsen and tighten those tariffs even further for South Africa?
No, on the contrary, I think what has happened here over the last few days and with this last minute wanting to be included, it sends a clear message. You know, the reality is that every previous president of the United States asked the question to its State Department, which is, which are our traditional allies, which are countries that I cannot ignore? And traditionally, over the last many years, the last 20 years at least, part of that answer is you have to take South Africa serious in terms of its location, in terms of its position on the continent, in terms of who it is. Trump decided to divert from this for the first time. You know, you can have your disagreements, of course. It doesn't mean we have to sing from the same hymn sheet all the time. But the kind of stunts that he has been pulling over the last 14 months has been unprecedented. And I think that he himself was quite surprised in the manner in which South Africa has been reacting very maturely. We've sent our delegations. The president went to go and meet him. We maintain our decorum and dignity in terms of international media. We gently dispel the falsehoods and the lies. And then this last stunt of wanting to boycott the G20, which has now completely blown up in his face, as yet again a reminder. You should have listened to the State Department when they said, take South Africa serious. Not because we are playing above our weight, etc. No, that's not the reason why you take South Africa serious. We are a small economy, but we are a significant economy on the continent. There is a reason why the BRICS formation and China insisted South Africa be part of it and cannot be ignored. We have a diverse economy all over. And so on and so forth. So I think, on the contrary, Trump is going to have to rethink, and Marco Rubio, about how they have future relations with South Africa, including what they are going to do with South Africa come the G20 of their presidency next year.
Speaking of the G20 of their presidency next year, Thembisa, I mean, others have already started anticipating whether or not the US would ban South Africa from attending. Would the response of other countries, should such an eventuality come in, be of any significance? Because some have even called for other countries to boycott the G20 next year should the US ban South Africa from attending.
Well, South Africa is a strong and respected member of the G20. G20 has got systems in place in terms of how it conducts and governs itself, and how it conducts and governs and administers the transition between the after the presidential or the chairpersonship is transferred from one to the other. So the United States cannot just change that as it wishes. This trioca that we've been talking about will continue. South Africa is, by virtue of having been the chair of G20 in 2025, is going to be part and parcel of the secretariat that's going to be preparing for the next G20. And I think, of course, Americans are going to be unkind. It's anticipated, particularly given that the trioca will consist of our Director General Zain Dango, who has been very vocal, particularly on the issues of Palestine. So we're expecting some fireworks, but I don't think they'll be able to change anything or systems that have, for the past couple of years, governed the running and administration of G20.
We know that the African Union has been the latest addition to the G20. Doc, maybe just talk to us with regards to that significance. How much more of a voice for the African continent does this create for the African Union being a part of the G20?
No, huge. You know, as you know, the European Union came into the G20 grouping. I think it was obvious that they had to invite the African Union in. And I think what that means for South Africa is that it can begin to concentrate on its own economy and its own needs within the grouping, and not so much just the African agenda. That will be taken up by the African Union, of course. The free trade agreement is what the African Union is going to want to push and put on the agenda. What are the benefits there? And indeed, as I said, they too are going to want to talk about regional bodies, whether it is ECOWAS, whether it is West Africa and so forth. So I think it's just all around a good idea for the African Union to be there and collaborating with South Africa in terms of pushing the Africa agenda.
Well, there's just been communication that's come in, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, both Doc as well as Thembisa. A senior government official in the presidency says the president won't hand over the gavel to juniors. It seems like the U.S. will have to fetch the gavel at DIRCO's headquarters, perhaps. What's your take on that, Thembisa?
Oh, that's interesting. It's breaking news. President Cyril Ramaphosa doubling down. I used to call him President Ramaphosa, but we're seeing a new president. So this is it's quite interesting what's going to be happening. And obviously, he won't be taking such a stance without support. So there certainly has been given guarantees to continue digging in his heels and further embarrass Donald Trump. So it's going to be an interesting couple hours leading to Saturday. We're all looking forward to it, but I didn't expect that there's going to be that doubling down. I think I was expecting that this gesture and the eating of a humble pie by the United States President Ramaphosa was going to extend an arm of peace and reconciliation, as he always does. But to have this new position of doubling down is quite surprising, and I'm also eating my humble pie once again. I'll stop calling him Ramaphosa and call him something else.
Doc, what's your take on the gavel now having been to be fetched from the offices of DIRCO?
Yeah, I mean, I find that very interesting. I think that Ramaphosa is playing politics. It's geopolitical now, which is that you try to embarrass me. And now it's my turn, because I'm holding the cards. And I don't think it's about coming to collect it at OR Tambo building of DIRCO, but it is perhaps also saying, here is another opportunity for me to come to the United States on different terms, to come and hand the gavel over, and to have a more mature interaction. Because short of that, we are not going to be handing over the gavel. You can't want to dictate from afar. Whilst you are boycotting, you want to dictate. And if you think you are going to send a junior person to come and collect the gavel, I'm the head of state. I'm not going to consort with juniors. So I do think I agree with Thembisa. It's quite an interesting stand, but a necessary one. I think that, for far too long, Africa has to kowtow to the whims of the colonial masters, to the hegemon, the United States. And it's time that we put our foot down and say, treat us with respect.
Most certainly. Thembisa, do you still think that option is still on the cards, with South Africa wanting to go to the US and handing over that gavel as an opportunity to have those talks?
Well, I think President Ramaphosa is going to continue playing this politics, and it will depend on how the United States react to this latest development. And that will determine the reaction. They'll either try and play it down, or Donald Trump will make noises, because at the moment, of course, this is the man who wants to have his limelight on him all the time. And one of the reasons, of course, why he didn't want to come is because the limelight was not going to be on him. So this is an embarrassing moment, and I'm sure it's going to be used throughout the night, and he'll want to respond. But they'll have to be very careful on how to deal with this, because I think Cyril Ramaphosa, when he has to, he can be a very good politician.
Gentlemen, it's certainly been an absolute pleasure getting your insights this evening. Thank you so much for your time, both the international relations expert, Dr. Oscar van Heerden, and senior research fellow at Africa-Asia Dialogues, Thembisa Fakude.